developed. There are a lot of new projects underway, but it's early days for that technology. Offshore wind is being developed, and personally I believe most of the genuinely suitable sites for full-scale wind farms onshore have now been taken, and one or two of those that have been taken weren't suitable in the first place. But I'm very, very pleased that we have got started as a society in making this change in our energy supply. It's early days, but at least we're moving. And I think there's been a lot of steps in the right direction. We can now learn and correct and improve.
Very, very quick response.
Just first of all, there are vertical axis turbines that will start in 1 to 2 metres per second.
Just explain what you mean by vertical.
Okay, most wind turbines are horizontal axis, in other words, like a child's window. Okay, the actual axis is like this, and the blade go around like this. But you can actually spin wind turbines like this, and they're more suitable for urban areas because, in actual fact, they start at much lower wind speeds. You usually need 5 metres per second for a large wind turbine, and they switch off at 25. Small wind turbines, there's quite a lot installed actually in cities. They start at 1 or 2 metres per second, which isn't very much. They actually are not as efficient, but in actual fact, they're much less intrusive, and they will start at very low speeds.
Phil wants to quickly.
Just to add to that, the one that people may be most aware of are the 2 turbines that are installed on the car park outside Stafford Railway Station. That is probably one you're most acquainted with of these vertical axis turbines.
Okay. Let's take another question, though. I'll just make the observation. I know it's in a corner there, but that bush hasn't moved with a drop of wind in the last hour. The gentleman there.
We've talked about the browning out, not in the black.
Brownouts.
No one has yet mentioned the large combustion plant directive from the EC. 31st of December? What's going to happen when we shut down?
It's happening sooner. I mean,
Yes,
as far as now, been actually closing it. What's happened is, because they've got to close these coal-fired plants.
Are people aware
No.
that in 2015, on the last day of the year, a large number of our power stations, our fossil fuel power stations, will cease power?
Oh, well, the European Union got the Nobel Prize, so they have to be right. The lady there in the front row.
Gas and electricity are very dangerous substance. They cause a lot of illness, and my sister, luckily, she went on holiday. I found that her family went on holiday. But while she was on holiday, the gas blew up and had to go home. And, it could have been a very different story if she would have been at home. So you don't talk about what's safer for us to be living in. And cerebral influx is, to me, a far more safe substance than power stations power stations rule. Totally can. What happened there?
But then we mustn't forget that bit of news film of a turbine catching on fire in high winds. So these things do happen. Or what?
BBC, man. You mustn't forget that, are you?
Yeah,
That's what she's talking about.
Yeah.
We need safe things, and to me, they're far more safer than a gas and energy provider or electricity. I mean, we wear these documentaries on telly, which you have.
But the turbine, of course, produces electricity.
Lots of people illnesses
Yeah.
live near them.
Yeah.
Causes cancer on a big,
Yeah.
level. You don't mention that.
So there's a great controversy at the moment in Wales because they're putting a new line of power pylons in to transport power from wind turbines. So, wind turbines produce electricity. Now, whether it produces cancer or not is another question.
It's a safer way of producing,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying.
I
It's a
understand.
safer way
Yeah.
of producing electricity than the power stations.
Fair point. Gentleman at the back.
My name is Ola, and I'm an agricultural engineer.
You're a what?
Agricultural engineer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, my concern about wind or no wind is we'll be talking about our farmers that are grading that are now making their lands now available for wind power. I want to ask if this wind project is installed on farmlands, even if it's 200 miles away or 20 kilometers away, those lands were meant to be used for agriculture.
Yeah.
We should be thinking about the future and what we can get from agriculture and make, because we live vitally on agriculture. We feed every day. So if we're in the name of power and energy, we started to now destroy our lands, which are meant for farmers to use. And the other aspect of my problem is that any land where wind power has been installed, though he said they are taller, but can there still be farming going under them?
Yeah.
Is it possible for farming to go under the wind turbine? Is it possible for farming to go under the wind turbine?
Absolutely.
And it's allowed?
Yeah. Yes. I'm working on a project at the moment in Lincolnshire where we've engaged with the community before putting the project into planning to discuss, or to inform and discuss and listen to what's said. And one of the questions that's come forward is, instead of putting up the wind generator, which we don't want to see, why don't you put in photovoltaic on the roofs? Well, the roofs aren't suitable and there aren't enough of them. The buildings aren't strong enough. And if we calculate the area of solar that would be required to provide the same amount of energy and the same carbon footprint reduction, then it would take over an acre of land out of production. Whereas with the wind generator, then there's a relatively small footprint under the generator itself, a crane pad and a small access track, which will be useful for farm work anyway, hauling on and off the field. So one of the benefits of wind generators is you can continue to farm the land underneath and produce food. It leaves more land available than solar PV would, although, as we've discussed, solar PV has its place in the renewable energy mix. And also, my office is in the middle of the largest SRC willow plantation in the world, I believe. That land would be growing food if it wasn't growing energy in the willow crop. I would much rather see wind turbines with food farming going on around them than the willow, although I'm very pleased the willow's there as part of this early step away from our heritage fuel source into a renewable and sustainable fuel source.
So why I asked this question is, somewhere in the north, I was going somewhere in the north. I thought that I saw a lot of wind turbine and there was no farming going on under it.
Because it's poor quality land.
Okay. So I was like,
very marginal land.
How much this kind of length of land for wind turbine without farming operation going again?
Most of the wind turbines are on marginal land which is only used for grazing often. It's not possible generally to be used for arable land. I do a huge amount of work in southern Scotland. The only thing it's actually used for agriculture in that land is actually grouse shooting, if you want to know.
Nothing wrong with grouse shooting, can't I do it? Nigel?
The land that's proposed for 2 wind turbines at the back of my adjacent village is actually farmed by a farmer, and the documentation that's been submitted with the planning application says that there will be a loss of 15% of farmable land with the wind generators being erected. So I can only assume that that's a near approximation of the sort of land loss that you get when you start installing wind farms. 15%. So he will still be able to farm 85% of the very large field that he plans to put these on.
Gentleman there.
Well, two questions actually. 50% of what?
15.
50% of this?
15.
No, he said 15.
15, 15%.
Oh,
many acres?
He said
the wind farm here, it's easily 50%.
If you-
you've got a big field,
No,
it's nothing to it. 15 does, it's not relative.
No, if you've got a field, he's got a field that he could get 4 wind turbines on, just about. Now, he will lose 15% of that field for farming.
How is it?
50% doesn't mean it's going to put a wind farm in here, so you're close to 100%.
Yeah.
So it's 50% what you quoted is a bit odd.
Yeah.
Likewise,
The whole field is 100%. They put the maximum number of wind turbines on the land, and you lose 15% of the farmable land.
Could you
That's
say
all I'm
what
saying.
field is in hectares or acres? Hectares or acres?
I'm trying to avoid people who've asked questions already. Quick supplementary.
we're talking about CO2, and the debate goes to and fro. It's all a bit muddled, and scientists say different things. But one thing we know about this debate is our carbon resources are finite.
Yeah.
That's simple. The gentleman has said it. The reason why he's investing in solar panels is only because it's making money for it. Didn't mention about the fact that it's
Well, at least he's honest.
well, but it's a bit strange on the fence that Professor gives prediction. I'm looking at 30, 40, 50 years, and maybe some of the great people are not here.
That sounded like William Hague.
What is expected also pricing increase in gas and carbon resources?
Well, gas is interesting.
Over the next 50 years.
Oil is a problem in that oil is geographically very limited, actually, and controlled mostly in the Middle East. Okay, there are other finds, offshore Brazil, etc. But in actual fact, getting easy oil, those days are gone. For years we've been saying we are at peak oil, but we probably were at peak oil. And I have this kind of this nightmare that I meet an alien and he says to me, you have this wonderful black liquid, you can make chemical from it, you can make medicine from it, you burnt it, okay, right? So that's not a good scenario. But in actual fact, gas is actually much more plentiful in actual fact, particularly because of shale gas deposits in the US. And in actual fact, the US's carbon footprint has gone down significantly in the last few years because of shale gas. Okay? And in actual fact, global gas prices are quite complicated. Canada now cannot sell gas to the US because Canadian gas is too expensive. The US has moved principally into its own indigenous gas sources. And lots of Eastern Europe would love to do that, particularly the Ukraine. The Ukraine has been held stranglehold for many years. People died all over Europe because of hypothermia, because of the spat between gas Putin and the Ukrainians. That's the supply of gas. And all of the pipelines are actually coming to the rest of Europe, all the way down to Turkey from the Ukraine. Now, Gazprom are actually really very concerned that there are other sources of gas now, apart from the Stockman field, which is the one which BP has just pulled out of, and another field, whose name escaped me in Siberia. But there is actually quite a lot of gas, which is partly why gas-fired power stations, as base load, make a great deal of sense. And it really does not. You do have to be able to deal with the neighbours effect. But what wind can do is displace the other dirtier bits. You know, Drax, Rougerie, you displace dirty bits. You don't displace gas necessarily with wind. You displace the other, more polluting forms of energy. There is a lot of gas. We will actually probably see gas prices stabilise. Okay, we probably won't see oil prices stabilise, but gas prices in the US are a quarter of what they are here.
Gentleman there.
Yeah. Can I come from the environmentalist side of things? I believe in harmony with nature and man being living in harmony with nature.
Yeah.
That brings in a couple of things. I want to leave a world for my children and grandchildren, which is basically the same as I inherited from my parents and grandparents. So the question is as deep down, for me, it is best to have a wind turbine than to burn something. Burning something that's sort of fossil fuel is actually destroying something. Whereas if you can create green electricity from man-made sources, it has to be done, and that's from the heart. And I think that's something that the gentleman here was talking about, not being able to put your hand in front of your face. Well, in cities, because of the police supers, it was only because of the 1956 Clean Air Act that actually changed that. And for me, it's got to be government legislation that has to reduce CO2 emissions and encourage renewable resources. And I don't know whether anybody disagree.
And of course, it's the target to produce electricity and other energy through, you know, non-renewable sources, renewable sources rather, that, you know, is driving all this now. I just quickly tell you, by the way, it's not just fault that the Clean Air Act and all that legislation was so effective in getting rid of. The Thames used to be absolutely filthy, and of course in the 19th century, the committee rooms of the House of Commons used to have, they used to have hanging from the windows wet, you know, drapes in order to try and absorb the smells, because the committee. The other day, a member of Parliament was caught by the police fishing off the terrace of the House of Commons. Unfortunately, well, what happened was that there is, in front of the barrier, you know, the ledge where, you know, separates the terrace of the House of Commons from the terrace,